So thank you all for joining today. This is Smith Publicity's first ever webinar series. So any technical difficulties, you can come blame me. We've developed this in celebration. It's our 25th year in business. So with your success in mind, we're really combining decades of knowledge across Smith Publicity, and of course, today here with Kait LeDonne, of our knowledge and our experience and expertise working with fellow industry professionals, all in support of helping authors and publishers bring success to their launch and really raise that visibility for their project and especially for their brand. My name's Corinne Mulder. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Smith and moderator of today's webinar, Developing Your Author Brand. So just to recap today, in this webinar, we're going to be walking through how to build your author brand from identifying and applying unique selling propositions to what social media platforms you should be active on and much more. It's our goal that you will walk away today with a very thorough understanding of why establishing your author brand is important, how you can do so to help you sell more books. And I'm so pleased to introduce you today to our hosts. We have Marissa Eigenbrood, who is Smith's Senior Vice President at Smith Publicity, working closely with all teams across the company throughout her career in public relations. She's worked with nonprofits, Fortune 500 companies, international brands, colleges and universities, tech startups, and of course, a number of partners in the publishing industry, from large-sized publishers to hybrid presses and debut authors as well. She brings extensive knowledge of the PR realm to our team, joining Smith Publicity in 2009. She began her career as a publicist and then expanded into her role as business development and now taking on significant leadership roles at the company. Such a pleasure to work with Marissa and in support of where she's taken our team. We have Kait LeDonne here as well. Kait is a fast friend of Smith's. She's the founder of Brandwise Media, a personal brand and social media agency based in New York. Kait has authored the book, The Attraction Magnet, the 7 insider secrets the world's biggest brands use to attract customers who can't wait to buy from them, and is regularly featured in national and international publications as a commentator on celebrity and corporate brands. Kait has also developed one of the first online courses centered around LinkedIn, the Influence Academy, to teach executives how to position themselves as thought leaders in their respective spaces. To date, over 100 executives have completed this program. Throughout our presentation today, we are going to be encouraging questions get dropped in the chat. We want this to be interactive. We're also a wordy team here, so want to move through our action slides as quickly as we can to deliver the advice. So without further ado, I have Kait take over to get us started here.
Thank you so much, Corinne. Thanks, Marissa, and thanks for the Smith team for having me on. A quick backstory: we actually started as a client of Smith's before we started working with them. So I always love to lead with that, because really found a lot of the learning lessons we'll impart today in practical application, both from the author side of things, and now I know both of our teams work with authors and quite frequently together. So the first part, when we're talking about developing an author brand, and Marissa and I will kind of bounce back and forth here to a degree, is you need to understand that the concept of developing an author personal brand and a personal brand at large inherently sets you up to fail. And what I mean by that is, the second we think we need to develop a personal brand or an authority brand, we put all this pressure on ourselves to make it about us. And that is the first misconception when it comes to developing your platform. You actually want to realize that branding is all about serving. And to do that, you need to get incredibly clear with who your reader is and who your audience is. One of my favorite quotes in marketing, and I live by it every day, is "the riches are in the niches." And now many of you are coming here saying, well, I'm an author, not a marketer. Some of you are authors who are marketers, but you need to start thinking like this, because if you get in this mindset from the beginning and you're doing everything with your end user, your reader or your audience member in mind, you're going to find that that process is much smoother as you go along. you're always wanting to answer the question, why is what I'm saying mattering to those who are reading? And this is a question that matters in both fiction and in nonfiction. As the sad reality is, nobody really cares about us at the end of the day. They're living life from their perspective and their challenges, and we need to meet them in the middle. So the first part we want to spend here talking about is getting very clear and very narrow on who your readers are. And some of you might think, wow, my book is for everybody. Marissa, how many times have you probably heard that from an author? Like, anybody could read it.
Absolutely. So often, and I often say, if your book is for everyone, your book is for no one then. So it's really important to dig in on that target audience.
That's right. And I would encourage you, and when we work with authors, the first place we start is saying, when you get so narrow, it hurts, you're probably in the right place. And I know this is going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel like, Kait, Marissa, I'm leaving money on the table. I'm leaving readers out. But when you want to go fast, you want to go narrow. So I want to take us on a little virtual field trip. Let's just do this thought experiment really quickly. We're going to do it from the lens of LinkedIn. And I'm just going to show you an example. So when we're looking at, let's say, who our readership is for, maybe we're writing a book about finances for growing your business or managing. So when we type that in, perhaps we want to go CFO, or perhaps we want to narrow that in and maybe it's for controllers. Oh, I want to specifically go after the people who are controlling, who are managing AR and AP in an organization. Now, if any of these terms I'm throwing out is completely going over anybody's heads, don't worry. It's just, this is a theoretical practice we're going to walk through. So you can see when you search controller just on LinkedIn and we hit the people tab, the results that it's driving is about 3.5 million people. Now that is a wide lens and aperture of folks to go after. When we look at filters and we start to zoom this down, we can maybe say, you know what, I really want them in IT, and perhaps I want them to be native English speakers. And when you show the results for that, we're now at about 208,000. Now, again, remember, little check here. Wow, we went from 3.5 million potential readers to 208,000. But if you're specifically speaking to the pain points and the challenges of being a controller in an IT industry, you're going to capture much more of this group of people. And Marissa, if we capture about 1% of this, you're talking about 2,000 book purchases. Now, what is the average number of book sales? I hate to just break it off with this, but yes, rundown of the average number of book sales an author will make in their lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to burst bubbles or crush dreams any kind of way, but the average book sells maybe 1,000 copies in its lifetime. And so hearing that number is an incredible kind of feat to reach. And just imagine, again, if you're adding more in terms of your marketing initiatives, in terms of your publicity, in terms of your social media, all other things we'll talk about today, but in really building the attention with those audiences, how many more you can potentially reach too. So I mean, 2,500 is an incredible number to reach on its own, but when you add more fuel to the fire, that number can get even bigger.
And the key point on that is you have much better of a chance of reaching a percentage of that if you've defined them so much so that you know what's keeping them up at night, what are their challenges, meeting them where they're at in their journey. Again, this sounds like I'm talking about strictly nonfiction, but we're seeing the same thing in fiction too. What is my reader going through? Are they feeling particularly stressed as a mother of 3 who holds a management job, and at the end of the evening, they want to have escapism from a romantic perspective? Okay, now I can market and speak to that in a way where I know what's driving purchase decisions for my reader. And so one of the activities that we always start personal brand campaigns with is get very, very narrow and define that. And then when you're feeling a little so narrow it hurts, do the following. Write this down. I promise all of you, this will be one of the most valuable exercises you do for marketing and writing your book. Write a diary entry from your reader's perspective, a day in their life. Use this as a hypothetical, empathetic experiment to stand in the place of your reader, write what's going on in their life. And when you do that, you're going to start to see what's moving them, what's concerning them. So this is a great point. I know Corinne will put something in the chat here. why don't we just see from the audience members, who is your readership? How many of you have done some of this core work? How would you define the ideal reader for your book? Or what questions do you have? Where are you feeling limited around that? Let's go ahead and see what comes up in the chat here.
And Kait will definitely grab that link for Kait's book for you. Kait, everybody wants to know where to buy your book.
Trying to track it down there. And yeah, we want to see questions that relate to this current topic, and of course, any that you might anticipate. Kait, I think it's very interesting because it seems to go so against the mentality. When you are working with a shorter lead time, you're saying to start small and to really, get granular. I think the mentality is start big. We want to get out to the masses. So how do you, when talking to someone who's coming into the process, kind of set that expectation?
I think time and time again, we see in book campaigns and personal branding campaigns and corporate branding campaigns, because that's certainly my background, where if you want to go fast and you want your message to actually land and resonate, you need to narrow your lane. When you do that, you actually make yourself edit and simplify your message in a way where it's stickier for those people in the lane to then refer it out to other people in other lanes. The problem is when we start talking generically, trying to hit every audience we can, the message becomes diluted and it actually has the opposite of the intended effect. So for me, I'd rather go narrow and potent, like the tip of a spear, puncture through the noise in an industry, and then get a rep in an association for being an authority on that, or an owner of that space. And then you'll find that you build your following faster and they start to pull in tangential audiences who may not otherwise come to the dance. There's some really great examples of people who have narrowed in just in this chat here. One of them that I saw was, I think, Christian adoptive parents. Now that is like, that is narrow right there. And you could go more narrow, and you probably have, where in the adoption process are they? What are they? Are they at the beginning? Are they at the end? Where are they in their journey? That's questions you want to ask yourself, that when you do that diary entry, when you stand in your reader's shoes, it'll start to unveil more of those people to you.
Absolutely. And I think there's so much power too, and just adding one more point to that, in really like planting your flag firmly in one particular area before you go on to conquer others, and we've had so many authors come to us who have experience in a certain area, and then they say, I'm a doctor, but I want to write a book about the criminal justice system. Let's start there. Let's start where you have that built-in audience and that built-in experience that we can really build off of. And then maybe there is an opportunity for you to go into those other spaces in the future, but just really plant your flag in what you know first. And there's just so much power in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that bleeds right into then, when you know who your audience is and who's reading, it dictates all the decisions you make around publishing your book, like publishing partner. So I'll toss that over to you, Marissa.
Perfect segue, Kait. Thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone's surprised. We're here to talk about author brand. Why are we talking about publishing right now and that path? But as publishing has become more and more democratized over the years, we have that choice. We have that ability as authors, as those supporting authors. So I know we're on this conversation today too, to guide yourself in that direction. Is going to get you in front of your audiences in the best way possible. And the publishing path that you choose is going to be the first big decision that you're making in the right path to reach those individuals. So, when you're thinking about your different options, of course, we have our traditional path, we have our hybrid path, we have our self-publishing path. And, as the years go on, I'm sure there'll be many, many more in between that emerge over time. And for so long, the traditional publishing path has had so much, power to it. It's had so much of the real, what's that word I'm looking for? Just the prestige. There we go. Of having that as part of your project. And for so long, traditional publishing also held on to a lot of the ways in which you got in front of your audience. They had the strongest distribution and sales channels, and still very much do. But what's great is that as hybrid publishing in particular has emerged even further, we have these opportunities to, work with distribution partnerships and sales partnerships within those hybrids as well. So as you're really thinking about your book, your messaging, who you're trying to reach and serve through your projects, it's identifying, kind of your timeline. How quickly does your book need to get to market? We always encourage that you're not rushing that process, but sometimes certain topics are going to warrant a faster timeline than others. And maybe that's where self-publishing comes into play as a potential good fit. At the same time, think about the retail channels that you're going to have available through those different options. So if you're going the self-publishing route, Amazon or through Ingram Spark are going to be your primary ways of reaching your audiences there. Well, if you're really looking at this book project you have as a business card, as a marketing tool, as something that's going to drive further attention to your expert platform, to your speaking platform, to services that you're offering through consulting, whatever it might be, then it's very likely that many of your audiences are going to want to consider bulk purchases of the book, as part of workshops and those speaking opportunities. And Amazon and Ingram Spark don't always offer the best opportunities for really getting those great bulk discounts for those individuals and those purchases. And so it's great to think about kind of, again, how are we getting to that audience through these different channels? And if that's the case, then hybrid publishing might be your better option to explore. So, asking those questions as you're, if you're still in the process of working on your book, or you have one that's already released and you're working on your next one, you're working with authors who are still at this stage and exploring those options, it's really critical to kind of look at the pros and cons that come with each of those different options. And there's a really great article that I'll grab the link for. It was on the Bindery Agency's website with a great breakdown of the pros and cons of different publishing options. And it's really important to kind of zero in on what does each one offer, what are the kind of, the holes that might need to be filled in with others. And there might be opportunities for you to bring in other team members to support that if you find the right partner who really has that clear inroad to your audience. Kait, anything with a particular type of publishing that you feel has really been important for a certain genre that you've experienced just in your work?
I think a key question that I know we both always ask authors at the beginning of an engagement is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what are you trying to accomplish here? Right? Are you trying to become a full-time author? Okay, that's going to inform a certain type of publishing. Are you trying to become a known authority or speaker? Is that the most important part of this book launch? And the book is more serving as brand leverage and a component of your overall expert brand. Okay, well then that, for all the reasons you mentioned, bulk purchases, are they an option? When you go to speak to an audience, hi, part of my base package is you need to buy 100 books for the audience, 500 books, 1,000 books, whatever that is. You're always going to be wanting to examine, where is the book in your marketing mix? And now, again, I know that I'm speaking a lot from a nonfiction book perspective, but it's just as relevant when you're talking about fiction. Is this part of a series? Is this part of, a longer play here? All of those are going to dictate how you are delivering the book to your audience members, because the way they receive it is part of their audience experience. Is it easy to purchase and grab online? Or is it easy to get this from a talk that I'm presenting? And so I think it's behoove of all of us to get very, very clear with ourselves on what is the role of the book in my overall brand and my goals as an author, as a thought leader, as an expert. Okay, if it's here, I might go hybrid. If it's here, I might go this direction. You're going to want to ask those questions.
Yeah, and I would wrap that up too with that, how important is the prestige of a certain publishing name to reaching your audience? How much weight will that carry? I think as it applies to, to both nonfiction and fiction, the name that's attached to it, the publishing name, isn't necessarily as important all the time. Certain media, of course, is going to be interested. Having that, it's just like saying, hey, you're a bestseller for Amazon versus New York Times bestseller. that carries different weight, of course, but you still get to say bestseller. You still get to say published author in these cases. And so again, really reflecting on your target readers. When we think about who they are, sometimes it can feel like, there are people who are out of reach, but think about someone directly in your friend group, in your family, who might have a connection to this audience within your really close professional network that, you can talk to and say, the last couple of books you purchased, did you buy it based on who the publisher was? I'm sure the answer is probably going to be no. And it's been more about the content and how that was being delivered to them in the end. So again, wanted to spend a little time on publishing there, but an important part of your brand, surprisingly.
Thank you so much, Marissa and Kait. I do have a question for you guys. So, if you're working with an author during the process of them kind of navigating the production plan that they're going after, what is one big question that you always have or would encourage an author bring to a potential production partner, if that's not too quick to get into?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a key question there is really understanding, I think on a nonfiction side, it's really having clear understanding of the marketing plans, the marketing team, just asking about what is available to me. And it's not to hold anything against someone if they don't offer those services, but it's to say, what other pieces of the puzzle do I need to fill in then as I build the team around my book launch? And so I think that's a really key question to ask, is around the marketing team. If you're on that business side with those potential bulk opportunities you're looking or projecting will happen around the launch, definitely encourages asking kind of what's the process of kind of bringing bulk orders through your publishing house, through your company. I think those are two key questions. Kait, any more you'd add?
I would just emphasize that first one. Sure. A lot of people, I think, don't realize it takes a village to publish a book. And oftentimes we're on the receiving end of it as a reader. And so it's like, okay, the book was written, it went to a publisher, it's disseminated, now we just purchase it. What I think few people realize is there's publicists behind it. There's special social media and digital teams behind it. And either that may exist with your publisher, depending on how they're approaching the marketing, or they may help you assemble that team, or you may assemble that team, but you want to go into it eyes wide open of what is and is not in play there, so you can, really set up that bench for your best chances of success.
That's such great advice, And I do encourage everybody drop in. I'm seeing some brainstorming happening in the chat, authors helping.
Love it.
We'll just encourage, if you want to drop in, questions or ideas of the path that you might be taking, questions regarding assembling your team, please go ahead, drop it, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. So now we're talking a lot about narrowing down your target audience. You're getting on track to actually bring your book to market. We're going to have Kait dive back in and talk a little bit about how to go about choosing which platforms to really spend your time on.
Yeah, so thanks, Corinne. When we're talking about publishing, in this sense, we're talking about the publisher that's pushing out the book, but you already want to start publishing content. If a book is published in a forest and no one's around to read it, did the book make a announcement? You get kind of the analogy.
There's one less tree now, but
yeah, there's one less tree. But it's kind of that same thing where if a tree falls and no one's there to hear it, did it make a sound? And so you want to start thinking about marketing my book is not an end game. It is a thing that I want in process while writing. I want to start publishing and sharing content while I'm doing that. When you do this from the beginning, even ideation, hi, this is the year that I'm publishing a book, community online. Here are the topics or the titles that I'm considering. Which would be of most value to you, A, B, or C? You're going to glean information that's going to make your writing sharper, more relevant, and ultimately more resonant with the audience you want to release it to. A big mistake we see people make is, I'm going to spend all this time and I'm going to write the book in kind of this vacuum. And then when I get it to a certain point and it's maybe in dev editing or editing, then I'm going to consider marketing it. Marketing it needs to be in your mind from the beginning. And the best way to do that, just like the democratization of, publishing the book, is the democratization of publishing your information. So That comes down to channel selection. And by channel selection, of course, I mean social media channels, but there's also channels like podcasting, blogging, Medium, Substack that we've all heard of. And when you think about which ones you want to utilize to start to bring a grassroots community into your writing and publishing journey so that they're ready to receive and buy into the book, you want to think of the intersectionality of two things. Number one, I've now done this fundamental work about my readers. I've narrowed the lens on who they are. I've gotten to a point where it's so narrow it hurts. I know what they're reading. I know where they're spending time. This is going to be a good platform. For example, I'm publishing a book for, grandmothers. So they're going to be more of a baby boomer generation. They want to be following pictures of their family. Maybe they live apart from their grandchildren. Facebook is obviously going to be right in step with that. I'm publishing a nonfiction book about cultivating and developing first-time managers in an technology sector. Okay, LinkedIn or maybe a blogging or podcast platform is going to be more in alignment with that. So certainly, because everything should be dictated from what is my reader thinking, paying attention to, and watching, you want to start there, but you also want to think about what you're comfortable with. Are you a person who is comfortable on audio but not video? Great. Podcasting, Clubhouse, LinkedIn, other platforms are coming out with audio scenarios where you can reach that. An author that I know, Marissa and I both know, Mary Beth Highland, has courses on Insight Timer. And so that is a community and an app where people can hear and hop into live audio rooms. So you want to think about, where's my audience? Where do they have a propensity to be? And where is my comfort zone in creating that content when it comes to delivery system? If I'm being real with myself, in addition to writing this book, am I going to write blogs on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis? If I can't do that, and I'm being honest with myself, and that habit isn't formed, it's probably not the best platform for you, because above anything, what will build your author brand is consistency. You need to consistently be pushing things out there to invite people into the journey, not releasing into a vacuum. So you want to find something that you're good at, you're comfortable with to a degree you're going to enjoy. I know it's work at the end of the day nonetheless, but when you do this, you're going to find that your audience starts to take shape. And then when you release the book, there's a bought-in group of people who are rooting for you. So when I was on LinkedIn, as you can probably tell where I spend most of my time, an author reached out to me and I had been watching him. His name is Alan Gannett. I think his book was called The Creative Curve. He has an agency in DC, and he was sharing the writing of that book journey. Oh, what cover design do you like? Here's some chapter titles. I'm thinking, would that be of value to you all? And then when his book was ready to release, he direct messaged me and said, Kait, thank you so much for always commenting on my posts. I really value your feedback. Hey, would you do me a big favor? The book is on pre-sale now. It would mean a lot to me as a marketer if you could grab a copy and review it. You better believe, Marissa, I was like, my time has come. He is calling on me. He can see I've been following him. I've been looking at this journey. Now it's my opportunity to shine. And of course, as an author, right, it's funny to think of our audience thinking that, because we're just hoping that they buy in. But if we've invited them alongside of us, there's going to be an honor to do it. At the end of the day, we want to see people win. And if we feel like we were a part of the creation of that book, we have more of an equity stake in seeing it sell. And so you want to be thinking about where that audience is and where I can connect with them and invite them into the journey. And in that way, it will actually help agilely shape your book. Better to get the input now that chapter 4 is just not going to land for people if it's titled this, but it is if it's titled this. So Marissa, I'm curious to hear, where do you see this come into play? And of course, where is that intersectionality? And I know that kind of goes to the next topic of social media, traditional media, all of the things.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's so exciting to follow along in that process. And I would say too, I think we have some authors in the chat that are kind of asking, well, what if my book's already out, or what if, like, where I'm at in the process? And it's never too late to start this, and that's something that I think a lot of people can be hard on themselves with, is to say, I didn't start this 8 months in advance of publication date. I didn't get a chance to do all of this legwork ahead of time. And you always have that opportunity to continue building that attention, whether you have another book planned or not. you can still give life to your book
Oh,
in
yeah.
those post-launch stages by continuing to share content and inspiration and stories and snippets of it. Even if it's a children's book, you can still be sharing, great little images or illustration, inspiration kind of
Yes.
sketches. There's just so many great pieces that you don't realize when you really dissect your book and you dissect the process that you've gone through, that I'm sure took months or years for so many people. There's so many elements of that can give you that fodder to add to your content, whether you're in those pre or post launch stages. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's not just about the pre-launch stage. If you get to do that, it's amazing, but don't forget the post launch is equally as important, and especially on a thought leadership kind of piece too, on the nonfiction side. It's critical that you're continuing to keep people engaged with that content. It's funny, I always talk about the kind of publicity, I say, is the amuse bouche. It's the kind of like that little palette teaser of your content. And we want to then have your social media, your website, your online presence is the entree. That's where, and the book then too is the entree, where you're really getting the chance to dive in even deeper and get a chance to know that person, know the content of the story even more so. And so that's why it's just so critical that you have these pieces in place, because publicity is just going to be that teaser that's going to get people excited. And then you want to be able to draw them in and keep them there with you for the long term.
100%. I think the key thing there is, a book and the publishing of a book is not the finish line. It is a milestone and an overall journey. So for those of you who are sitting here like, oh crap, I didn't do this when launching. No, it's never too late to invite people into that journey, because your journey as an author is not over. This book exists in perpetuity, as does the community. And there are now tons of talking points from the book that you can have a dialogue with your audience online. Let's just not forget that Yuval Noah Harari, author of Sapiens, for those of us that know, that's been a worldwide success. He published the book and it did diddly squat. I mean, it really did not perform. He came back and he republished it, and he had built up his thought leadership, and now you see him everywhere. And so, just because you launched and you may have missed that opportunity, it really is not that. It really is not that.
These are all such great reminders. And yes, I think even, as we're leading right into our final action item here, with publicity, we have seen the media landscape shifting so drastically. It's always in flux, but of course, through the pandemic, we've seen so many different changes. And I think across the board, what we realize is the power of a book to bring reflection on things that have happened, whether it's to your brand story, to the experiences that you've had. If you're wanting to break into working with associations and communities that really speak to the advice you're driving, or even just the benefit of bringing a fun story to market, you really can't start promoting yourself too late. It's just important to do it. So now we lead into our fourth topic here, publicizing your book, and Marissa's going to take it away here.
Thanks so much. We talk all about, Kait, just talking so much about this important content and all the content that you're consistently sharing, and garnering coverage to the media is another wonderful piece of content to be able to share through those platforms. And so, with social media, what I like to think about that is, and really your overall online presence is, you spend all this time building and cultivating that content and your strategy around that. But it is content that is curated and it's controlled, and you are controlling the narrative of what you're sharing through that content when it's coming directly from your platform. What the media then offers is that incredible backup. It's that incredible kind of, that sign of approval on your credentials, on your story. It's something that's giving you that authority, and adding an element of trust as well when it's coming from trusted media sources. So it's that extra piece to add in, but it's something that you can add in when that coverage happens, as in that particular moment. But it's also something that has life for months and years beyond that too, where you can reshare, hey, there was this great review that I got on this blog, and I'm sharing it in this moment, I'm celebrating it, but I'm also sharing it again 3 months from now because this other book came out, it's getting a lot of attention, and there's similar themes to my books. I'm going to reshare this. You're connecting it to kind of what's going on in the world, what's going on in your industry, what's going on in the news of the time, and how those pieces can be recycled and brought back up to once again show, hey, remember that time I was in Inc. Remember that time that I was in the New York Times. It's just that other piece of backing that is so important to further developing and building your brand. I'm going to go back to that word I couldn't think of earlier, which was prestige, in that prestige applies so much to the world of publicity too, in that, it does come into play with the brand building media that you want to be thinking about. What are those really great logos that can lift up your website, that people say, wow, I recognize these places when they go to the website, or they recognize it when they're scrolling through your social feed. Those are really impactful for that brand elevation and having the backing of those really impressive outlets. But what's sometimes even more impactful is those opportunities to really reach where that target audience lives. We're going to circle back to number one here again, and really think about where are your audiences getting their news? Where are they going for their education, for their inspiration, their motivation? What are they looking at? And sometimes even your own inbox is a wonderful reflection of that. If you consider yourself to be, a lot of times you're your own target audience in a lot of ways. And so, I'm sure as a business author who's focused on emerging leaders, you might get Inc. or Entrepreneur or Fast Company newsletters to your inbox every day. But are you also getting something from a really great podcast that you regularly listen to, or from a blog, or from an influencer in that space? And that's a great target. That's someone to absolutely go to. And in those cases, a lot of the time, you're going to reach more people than you might have through that Inc. opportunity. It's great. I always say when you want to roast a chicken, let's just say, do you open the Wall Street Journal and just hope there's going to be a recipe to roast a chicken in there that day? No, you're going to go to a specific food, focused website for that recipe. And so that's likely the way your audiences are thinking too. They're going to want to go to a source that they know is going to deliver that exact type of content, as opposed to hoping that a bigger outlet might have potentially covered it recently. And so when we really think about, those audience-centric opportunities, they're often the drivers too for the speaking opportunities. They're often the drivers for the new business opportunities, or for being a frequent contributor somewhere too, for sparking more of those workshops or speaking engagements over time. A really fantastic example is a past client of ours. Her name is Carrie Goyette. She wrote a book called The Non-Essential Guide to Emotional Intelligence. She was a Harvard published author. Just loved working with Carrie. And we started with her around the launch of her book, but also for quite a bit of time post-launch. Again, just really talking about that thought leadership importance there. In working with Carrie, she wrote lots of great articles throughout. She participated in lots of podcasts. She had brand building media opportunities too. What we heard from her after a few years of working together was that she had two speaking opportunities in particular that had come directly from media coverage. One was through an article that she had written for Axios. Well known, I'm sure lots of our business people know about Axios who are in the conversation here. That resulted in a speaking engagement when someone came upon that article searching for experts focused on emotional intelligence. On the other side, she had a speaking engagement come from an article in Hotel Executive Magazine. I think she even got to go to the Caribbean for that opportunity, for that speaking engagement. And that was, again, an events coordinator who was looking within their industry for someone who could specifically speak to what they felt was important to cover in their keynote for that conference. And so, media has the potential to reach so many different audiences and create so much diversity and discoverability around your message. And it's just another way of making sure that you're really digging in on where your audience lives to get directly in front of them. Kait, what have you noticed, and kind of connecting what I'm talking about here and our last section around social media? Are there any particular outlets that you see kind of being most impactful in getting attention and getting response through posts, in terms of the format?
I think a big thing that you're hitting on here is weighing prestige versus personalization.
Mhm.
And for better or for worse, we could maybe argue this 7 different ways in terms of societal impact. Media is becoming more and more fragmented, more and more
Yeah.
personalized. And oftentimes it's the more personalized media that has the higher potency. So if you're asking me, right, hey, Kait, would you rather get a mention in the New York Times, or would you rather get on this podcast with 10,000 subscribers, but they are listening and they are spending an hour bottom to top with this person and they are exactly your reader? I'm going to go for potency in that instance. I mean, one will absolutely build credibility, but if I'm trying to drive potency, I'm going to pick the other. And so when you're examining these things, I love the example that you use with the hotel management association. Never forsake the power of what that can drive because you think that the prestige is not there. It will continue to niche out as we see this play out. And you always want to keep a mind on, where do I want to properly enter the slipstream of that conversation where the hearts and minds of my reader already is. I'm a huge fan of podcasts right now. I'm like, yep, I'll do them. What's your listenership? What are we talking about? And ultimately, the thing that we also want to keep in mind, I know this is a driving point for me, is I do speak quite a bit. And that's a part of my services. And the one thing that a lot of conference organizers or meeting and event planners say to me is, I went and I listened to a few past episodes of you on a podcast, and I like what you're saying and I like how you're saying it. So we want you to come speak. And so it's kind of serving that dual purpose there that language may not. Now, having said that, and I know Marissa always talks about this, there's also the power of SEO with those longer form placements in the written word. And so again, you just always want to be weighting out, what are the pros and cons and how do they relate to that target audience and where you're trying to intersect with that target audience.
Yeah. There's 2 points I'm seeing in the chat right now that I wanted to call out. One was Megan Harvey said, those prestige sources are often less targeted than the more niche potent ones. And, that's why it's such a key piece of like our strategy at Smith, is that those brand builders are often, there's more space between those typically. You're working toward those and they take more time to massage and to bring to fruition. And so instead of just waiting for the next one to come out and not doing anything in the interim, let's really dig in on those niche opportunities, those targeted opportunities to fill the space between the big opportunities that are the more brand builders. And again, they're both just as impactful and valuable in different ways, in their own ways. But that's about kind of the cadence of publicity when you're thinking about it, is kind of using those other opportunities as filler is a terrible word, because filler is usually something that's not worthwhile, but it is having that those opportunities still kind of sharing your voice in between. And the other point I wanted to make was Thomas brings up that he's always sold books through podcast hosting and live presentations. And as we discussed today, we're talking about ways to sell more books too. We've heard from so many publishers recently that podcast audiences are the new book buying audience. For the longest time, it was, NPR was our go-to for that, and certainly an incredibly educated and often book purchasing audience still. But our podcasters are seeking out specific information. You're going into a podcast that you're exploring a certain topic, and you're picking an episode of what you want to listen to at that time, what you're seeking out at that moment. And so you're automatically getting this more condensed, excited audience for that content. And so I'm not surprised, Thomas, to hear you're having that success there. And it's something that we're emphasizing so much in our work anymore, is the true power that podcasts have in helping with those book sales.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marissa. You're jumping into some of the questions. Been taking some questions down on this side, and we do have some more time here. So I'll leave this slide up here. Would definitely encourage everybody connect with Kait, Marissa on LinkedIn. You can follow Smith Publicity. There are a lot of questions here, which we're so thankful for, but this is all, going to help us continue delivering content that you all want to hear. So just saying now, thank you to everyone who could join. I know some people might have to pop off. We specifically went for 50 minutes because of the back-to-back Zoom world we live in now. But do have some time here. So if people want to stay on, we can certainly take that extra time. But to jump in here, we had a question from Rob early on, which was, when it comes to book sales or building a following, do you choose one or the other?
Oh, it's a great question, Rob. Rob Fazio.
It is.
Rob Fazio. I don't think you choose one or the other because they're so interconnected with one another. When you're building that audience, the book sales should come from it. I think maybe it is a little bit of there is actually a chicken before the egg in this situation, and that the audience work needs to come first. But I think they're so close with each other there, because you also want to be thinking about some of those initiatives that might help to elevate the book. Maybe you're working on award submissions, or just other kind of book-centric marketing, Amazon advertising strategies. Those can be really book-centric kind of initiatives that you still want to be focusing on as well, that are really going to help amplify the book and drive more reviews to it. But again, I would probably put that target audience piece just a touch before it, because that's ultimately going to help to drive more sales for the long term. Kait?
Yeah, I think, Rob, they're one and the same. It depends on where they're at in their journey with you specifically. So, they might have, my experience with a book called Hunt, Gather, Parent, read an NPR article. The woman was talking about how remote indigenous cultures are raising, helpful children. Thought it was fascinating. Bought the book, know nothing about her. Have since become a follower because I thought it was interesting. That's where I was at in my journey with her. Other people I know were following her for years, then the book launched. And so it's not necessarily an either or, but you do want to have a knowledge of where you would define a person as a reader versus a follower, and where the kind of interplay of that is.
Thank you so much. This is a question that I have been hearing more and more, which is, how do you determine the website strategy? We are seeing, there's the brand website for many. Kait, I think this might live a little bit more in your world with funnels and digital marketing, but is it worth it to have an author create a landing page? Should it be incorporated? Should all book information be incorporated into one brand site? Just kind of thinking through here from where we would want to see authors driving that attention, and any recommendation you would have.
Yes, at minimum, have a book and an author landing page about you, about the book, about your audience, and give them space to sign up and follow. Ultimately, I am a brander and a social media ist by heart. And yet we see time and time again that it is just one fickle move from an algorithm and your reach is completely cut out from under you. And so if you don't have yet another place you're pushing that audience, like a newsletter or a blog that you own, you completely own and dictate, you are not setting yourself up for longevity in that relationship. They'll also wax and wane from platforms. The audience that was on Facebook 15 years ago is now on a different platform. And so you want to kind of have an evergreen place for people to come back to that is not reliant on A, social media, or B, traditional media, or any third party that will own that information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say with the kind of branding of the site, I always advise going with the author name for the website, or just have me author centric first and foremost, so that even if you don't feel like right now there's another book in you, in the future there might be, and you can then add more books to it, or you can add programs, you can add workshops, you can add whatever other offerings you have through it to that site, versus it being a book centric site. However, I will say sometimes I would more so in the fiction or maybe children's realm, if you're working on a series, it might be worth really trying to create characters in this kind of world that people are living in. The series site might make a little bit more sense in that case, especially if as a fiction author, potentially you're writing a YA series, but want to write, romance in the future. Probably maybe don't have them living on the same site.
That's right.
such a good point. For first-time authors or even veteran authors, because we see the landscape change so frequently. If an author is kind of set on a path for production, at what point should they be reaching out to a publicist, Marissa, versus when they should be reaching out to digital marketing? Should it be done at the same time? And if staggered, what would be the right order here?
Mm-hmm. It's never too early to reach out for either. I'm speaking for Kait in this instance too, in that we want to hear from you yesterday, always. Whether it's time for us to start working yet in the publicity side of things, it might not be yet, but we can talk about what are the other teams you want to think about bringing in, the digital marketing teams, the speaker agents, the website designers, whoever else you might need to bring in. We love to help put that puzzle together, because I often say that publicity is like the last domino to fall in the dominoes. We're lining them up, and we want to make sure those other dominoes are nice and straight, so that when it's time for publicity, we get to really shoot off into that Rube Goldberg of fun, at the end there. But so publicity might not start actively until closer to launch, but we can again have discussions, do consulting, do other things in the lead up stage too, just make sure you're ready for that success. Kait, what would you add there? Again, I think yesterday is always the answer, right?
Yeah, yesterday, last year.
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself some grace in time to build that following. And I don't say that because it's in my best interest. I say it because it's in yours. I mean, I'm at a point now where, very candidly, I have collectively about 60,000 followers. And I think a lot of people on the surface may say, oh, it's so great, admirable, whatever, and think that it took me a year or two to build. That is the culmination of 10 years of consistent work. And now I know that 60,000 is bought in. And when I release something, there's a propensity to buy there, but it started 10 years ago. And so you want to always be building and engaging in that regard as soon as you possibly can. And yet, for those of you who are thinking, I really missed the boat, you didn't start today. Even if your book is out, start today. The key is to start and to consistently do it in some fashion.
Mm-hmm. Helpful. This is a question that kind of pulled together from a few authors' observations, but what are some tips for competitor analysis, and why is it important to know the personalities, experts, books that live in your space?
Oh, I love that question. We love at the beginning of a publicity campaign to often reverse engineer another title and see what has worked for them. Especially as Corinne, you mentioned earlier, the media landscape is constantly changing. Our digital platforms are constantly changing. Everything's always changing. So we can't always go back to a book from 10 years ago and follow how that one worked successfully, but let's look at ones right now that are working really well. Understanding, it's a little bit of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it to a degree. Don't be afraid to follow in the footsteps of others, but kind of add your own cadence to that. And there's just a lot to be learned from the successes of others. And like I said, what has worked, what audiences have connected. And a lot of times what we find is that we feel like we know sometimes who the audiences are, but a lot of times other kind of tertiary audiences are going to slide in out of nowhere as a surprise to us. And we might see that through understanding the successes of our competitors, for a title. We might be able to see, wow, we didn't expect for this title to have a lot of success in the world of environmental science, let's just say. And so maybe that's a target for your book too. That's what's just great to kind of understand that and see really what's worked.
Excellent. Well, I think we can wrap with 5 minutes here, unless Kait, Marissa, you have anything else to add?
I would just say, and Marissa, you might be leaning on this too. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. Corinne will very much fact check me if I'm wrong on this. They are not being shot out into a vacuum. Speaking of, it is very helpful to know. So as we follow up with this, there's answers to that. It's informing things that will be released to you all. So, everybody's so crunched for time these days, but the chat, watching the chat, I mean, what an audience today.
great audience. People are asking if we have a group chat to join. But to Kait's point, I think even pulling together some of the answers, we're already going to prepare an email to send out with the link. We'll include some other supportive links as well, just based around the comments we had, any examples that we referenced. And like I said, please feel free to reach out to both Kait, Marissa, to Smith, Brandwise. Be in touch and ask us your questions directly. We know it's a big process, a big decision on either end. So we really just look forward to being connected and staying in touch.